All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're through another week of the college basketball season, and if you have been enjoying our content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate your support, but we're over the halfway point now, for sure, for just about every team. But some big games were played this week, some notable losses as well. Cody, I'll kick things off with you. What were your games of the week? Who do you think overperformed? Who do you think underperformed? What are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of good games this week, as it's going to be with conference play for the rest of the year. Going to get a banger Saturday every single week. Tuesdays are obviously great days of the week as well, but just like some teams that I wanted to shout out, I guess at the top, obviously Kansas had a big week. Wins over Iowa State and Baylor at home. Maybe the Baylor win won't age like that well. They're kind of in a slide lately. That's another team, another discussion to have. But the win over Iowa State was a massive one to get them turned around. And, Darren Peterson, obviously one of the best players in the country. The injury stuff is kind of starting to move off to the wayside, and everyone's talking about just how efficient he is with the shot volume that he gets every night. I think he's taken last time I checked, I think it was 38% of Kansas's shots while he's on the floor, which I believe if he was an actual qualifier would lead the country by a good amount. But yeah, he's given this Kansas offense a new level. He's given them a new ceiling now that he's back in the mix for 30 minutes plus every time out. So they've been fantastic. They're a team you got to watch out for because that defense has carried them for a while this season. But now this offense looks like they have some sort of ceiling. One other team would be Florida. Florida's starting to right the ship. I think people kind of threw them off to the wayside after some losses to some really good teams. I think the only actual blemish they had on their resume was the TCU loss, but that's not a terrible loss by any means. They've beaten some really good teams this year. They've competed with even Michigan, who we kind of thought was immortal, and they've started to come back down to earth. But TCU is a good squad. They have good wins as well. So, but they lost all those games by a combined 15 points in their 4 losses, I guess, or in their 5 losses. That loss to Missouri, not fantastic, but this week wins both on the road against Oklahoma and obviously Vanderbilt on Saturday. They kind of just dominated Vanderbilt on the glass, which they're going to do to pretty much every team they play all year long. They're going to have that advantage. They're second in the country in offensive rebound rate, third in the country in defensive rebound rate, and they really showed who the bigger and stronger team was in that game. So, and it's not easy to get road wins in league play, really in any league. So shout out to them to picking up a couple road ones to get them ahead of the curve. Another team I wanted to shout out that really no one's talking about all that much is the Clemson Tigers. They've been phenomenal. They're 6-0 in ACC play. I think Brad Brownell is he's probably the best coach that nobody talks about. We've alluded to this a little bit, even in the offseason, nobody talks about how good of defensive teams that he has year in and year out. They're 14th rated in KenPom defense right now, and he's had a top 65 defense or better in 14 of his 16 years at Clemson. I think he's the longest tenured coach in the ACC, if I'm not mistaken. And he just continues to go under the radar every single year. They haven't played the greatest ACC schedule so far, but 6-0 with really good wins on their resume throughout this season. They probably should have beat BYU at the Garden as well if it wasn't for that Rob Wright 30-footer on the move that at the buzzer that took them down. But they've had a very good season. He's always done more with less, and he just continues to do it again. And then just one more note for this past week is the WCC race is actually kind of starting to pick up, and it could get extremely interesting with the injury with Gonzaga to Braden Huff. He's going to be out 4 to 8 weeks. Graham Ike missed last game, so they had to play a ton of small ball against Seattle, and they held their own. Obviously, their defense won in that game, but it's definitely something to monitor over the course of the rest of the year. Undefeated in league play, but Santa Clara and St. Mary's are right behind them at 7-1 and 6-1 respectively. Santa Clara's proven that they can be in the mix. They were bleeding against Gonzaga at halftime, and then obviously on Saturday they were able to beat St. Mary's at home. Their size and physicality and rebounding ability is going to allow them to play up against quality competition. So, I mean, it's just something to monitor, I guess. I mean, if Huff doesn't come back before the end of conference play, like I think there's a very serious chance that either Santa Clara or St. Mary's could win this league.
Yeah, absolutely. I know how much you look forward to watching those 11 p.m. midnight games.
Yeah. The St. Mary's Gonzaga game is the two games that they play every year are usually three when they play in the conference title game. Those are my three favorite games of the year. Just the clash of styles that they have, and how Randy Bennett has kind of dominated that matchup the past couple of years. They're the two-time reigning WCC regular season champion right now. So it's one of my favorite games every year.
Yeah, you gotta love it. And shout out Texas Tech beating BYU this past Saturday. That was a huge win for them, and I don't think a ton of people were leaning Texas Tech against that nice BYU team, but they pulled out a nice win. I mean, 84-71. Marcus, what are some teams you want to highlight this past week?
Yeah, I think kind of similarly to Clemson that Cody mentioned, another ACC team that's started, I think, to get on the radar of people a little bit more, but still, I think, a little bit under the radar is Virginia. And they had another impressive week last week. Two big road wins to improve to 5-1 in the league. Went at Louisville, who, we'll touch on that maybe in a minute, but like panic buttons, I think, are starting to be pressed a little bit. I know they followed up that loss with a 41-point win at Pittsburgh, who's in a whole different world of disarray. But Virginia winning handily. They won by 10, but that game they kind of always had that in hand. They jumped out on them quick. I think it was 13-0, if I remember right off the jump. They shot the three ball extremely well throughout the week. I think they made 12 or more threes in both games, had at least 14 offensive rebounds in both games, which was an area we highlighted last week as one of their main strengths, and it's continued to show through for them, in particular on the road, which they followed up with another win at SMU on Saturday, where they made 12 threes in that one and had 16 offensive rebounds. So another really impressive win. They're playing really good basketball. Ryan Odom has them humming, and I think has a real chance to sort of mess around and maybe win the ACC. Like they're certainly in the mix at this stage with how well they're playing and how quickly Ryan Odom has gotten that program back to where their fans were a little bit more used to seeing them. So shout out Virginia. I think Texas A&M at least deserves a shout. Like they've quietly been solid. I think they're leading the SEC right now for whatever that's worth. There's obviously a lot of parity in that league, and it's not quite the same. And some of that has to do with like who you play early on in league play. Like they haven't played the most daunting schedule. LSU, Auburn on the road's a good win. Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas, with their lone loss coming to Tennessee in double overtime. But they've done a good job going to Texas, who had just beaten Vanderbilt by 16 earlier in the week, and they bounced back. And Texas was certainly favored in this game, especially coming off that. And A&M bounced back off the loss and picked up a nice road win. 14-4. I know, Cody, where we kind of slated A&M early in the season, certainly way ahead of where we would have expected right now. And I still, similar to how I talked about Seton Hall last week, I'm still sort of not buying it. It's one of those things where I think they will fizzle out. Like their schedule, I would have to imagine, does get a little bit more difficult. They have Mississippi State and South Carolina this week, both at home. So they're certainly, I would think, going to be favored in both of those games. But, following that, they kind of get into a gauntlet of Georgia and Bama on the road, Florida at Vanderbilt. They got Arkansas on the road coming. So it's not going to be an easy stretch that they're going to go through. So we'll give them their flowers for now. I just don't really see like the style of play that they have, picking up full court. We talked about it in the preseason, like picking up 94 feet for for 40 minutes in the SEC. I just don't really see it being overly sustainable for a full conference schedule. But if they're able to and continue to have the success that they do, then I'll eat my words. I just don't really expect it. And then I guess a couple others to shout out real quick. I will kind of mention it already, but the Texas win against Vanderbilt, they had back-to-back against Bama and Vanderbilt. Those were really good. They could have really kind of put themselves in a good spot if they had finished the week and won at home against A&M, but still two really good wins for the resume nonetheless. And then I think two teams that are quietly figuring things out a little bit. We've seen Kentucky now win 3 straight, get to 3-2 in the league. I know it's still it wasn't pretty last week against LSU. It took a miracle Malachi Moreno game winner. But then a nice win at Tennessee, Tennessee's another team kind of like Louisville where I think panic buttons are being pressed a little bit. It just hasn't looked all that good. And, guard depth certainly an issue for them. But, Kentucky, 3 straight wins in the SEC. It's hard to win in that league, hard to win on the road in that league. So they're starting to get things maybe on the right track. And then Houston, I think, really ever since that game against Cincinnati on the road where they battled and came back and ultimately won the game. We've seen them now over the last couple of weeks really kind of the hammer on teams and, followed it up yesterday. They beat Arizona State by 30. West Virginia earlier in the week, they beat by 30, allowed only 48 points in that game. They beat the brakes off Baylor last weekend by 22, held them to 55. So, I think Houston is really trending in the right direction. Offensively, especially, I think they're starting to maybe figure some things out. Chris Sinak had a nice game yesterday, 18 points for them. So if the offense is really starting to figure some things out for Houston, the defense we always know is going to be what it is, elite. Then I think Houston is starting to work itself back into more of the mix. I think people kind of got a little bit down on them because it wasn't the prettiest early in the year, even though they do have still just the one loss. It wasn't the prettiest early in the year, like the win in overtime against Syracuse. So, I'm rooting for Houston. Kelvin Sampson, we've talked about it a lot. We'd like to see him get his ring, but hopefully this can be the team that can do it for him.
Yeah, that was a good shout with A&M. I think that's a team that might not be on a lot of people's radars. So I think they're a team that probably deserves to be on some people's radars now. But we're going to switch bases a little bit, talk about maybe some teams that have been struggling. There's one team in particular that I have top of mind, North Carolina. A couple bad losses this previous week. What do we think about North Carolina? How do we think they respond? Where do we think their issues stem from? Cody, I'll let you dive into this.
Yeah, they've certainly had their share of issues, especially over their last, really since league play has started. And the West Coast trip obviously wasn't very kind to them with losses to Stanford and Cal, where they were kind of just ripped apart. Their defense kind of just collapsed over this past week. They're 106th in adjusted defense this season against top 75 competition. At one point, they were a top 15 defense in the sport, according to Ken Palm, and it's just kind of, I don't really know how fraudulent that was, because I think a lot of this right now is how unlucky they have been from 3. I know they are giving up a lot of pretty good looks, but in a 4-game sample size, if you're giving up 58 threes, 58 for 116 from 3, that's a 50% clip. The worst defense, the worst 3-point defense in the country typically falls around high 30s, maybe 40%. This just isn't something that is going to be sustainable. And maybe early in the season they were a bit fortunate, gave up some clean looks that didn't fall, but ultimately you can attribute some of this to very unlucky shooting splits. But they do certainly have their issues. They can't just stay in their drop coverage with Henry Vasar, who I think is starting to get exposed a little bit defensively. He's a good rim protector. He's not a great rim protector, and I think he got exposed a little bit defending in space this this past week when they tried to high hedge Corey just like what easily got around him and then created a 4-on-3 opportunity for some of those other shooters for Stanford, like Agarwal and Jeremy Dett-Smith had a great day. So they just need to find a way to be a little bit more adaptable. I know they were playing some zone and they were kind of getting shredded there too. So that's kind of been a curveball for a lot of teams. They've been trying to sprinkle in some zone, but when you have to play zone because your man defense is so bad, you certainly have your issues. So ultimately, I'm going to pump the brakes on like all of the Carolina. Like a lot of people are hitting the panic button with them, but I am willing to kind of pump the brakes for them. The wing defenders are an issue, and if Luka Bogovac and Kyan Evans aren't hitting shots, they aren't really worth all that much. They're both shooting in the low 30s from three. They need to be a little bit better than that. But ultimately, I'm willing to pump the brakes. I still think this is a top 5 team in the ACC with a bullet. I think they can compete come March. I still view them as like a Sweet 16 team or around there. But the defense does need to figure it out.
Yeah, the Carolina fans will be happy to hear you say that for sure. Marcus, what are your thoughts on Carolina this past week and just in general moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the similar thoughts to Cody. Like, they have been a bit unfortunate, but at the same time, like, they are giving up a lot of open looks. And if they don't kind of shore some of that up, then it could be sort of a long conference season. Like this week, they have a big week. They have Notre Dame, and then they go at Virginia, which we've just talked about Virginia. They've been playing really well. Carolina needs, I think, at least for their fans, they need to win a game like that at Virginia to really, really pump the brakes. Like, they can hear Cody say what he said all they want, but knowing how Carolina fans are, they're not going to really pump the brakes until either one change is made, which I know a lot of Carolina fans are ready to end Hubert, and then or they just win some games, right? So, like, winning masks a lot of issues. So if they can somehow find a way to go 2-0 this week, that would go a long way. Like, they're obviously struggling, but like we talk about oftentimes with a lot of these teams, you know, it's hard to sustain, you know, playing the same way for a full season, right? Like, I will talk about Iowa State, I'm sure, as well. Like, Iowa State had a bad week, right? Does that change how we feel about Iowa State? Not really. You know, they lost 2 games, both on the road, both not easy places to play. And, you know, that is what it is. You know, Carolina had a bad week. You know, am I a little bit worried? Yes, because the defense just hasn't been great for a bit of time now. But like, ultimately, I think they will be fine. Like, it's not like they're in danger of like being on the bubble at this stage. I still think they're more than talented enough. Like, they're going to have some luck start to go their way, I would think, as well. So I wouldn't panic just yet. But, you know, knowing how UNC fans are, they certainly are.
Yeah, I want to mention Iowa State and as well as Louisville, maybe some other teams that fans are hitting the panic button maybe a little prematurely on. But yeah, Iowa State, first 2 losses of the season. Louisville, I mean, they lost to Virginia, which is by no means a bad loss. I mean, Virginia has proven that they are one of the top teams in the ACC. But what are some teams that maybe we're hitting the panic button, or some people are hitting the panic button too early on? And what do you think about these teams moving forward? Cody, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll just touch on Louisville and Iowa State a little bit. I think Louisville, you kind of need to wait until Mikael Brown comes back. I know he's practicing this week, and he's a really important piece, especially for their offense when it comes to a guy just getting into the middle of the lane and creating a catch and shoot opportunity for guys like Conwell and McNeely and even Adrian Woolley. You know, they've put a lot of the pressure on Conwell and Woolley to get in the lane and create for others, but I just think those guys sliding up into a more on-ball, like, prominent role has kind of taken away what makes them great. And I don't, like, personally, I'm probably a little bit lower than Mikael Brown than like consensus, more as like an NBA prospect than anything. And his shooting efficiency has been fairly rough when he's been on the floor, but his ability to create for others is a dynamic that this Louisville offense really needs long term if they're going to have that true championship ceiling. Like they can beat anybody on any night because of how good their shooting is and how many threes they take per game. They're number one in the country in 3-point attempt rate. 54% of their shots come from beyond the arc. So I think they're going to be okay, especially when they get Mikal Brown back. The defense has actually like held its own. And I think if they stay in like this top 40 range, I do think that it gets them in contention for a Final Four. Absolutely. If they go on a hot stretch shooting wise and take down a few 1 seeds or take down a 1 seed on the way, because they absolutely can. Because like on the season, rebounding was kind of an issue for us, but they're 29th nationally in defensive rebound rate, and they're starting to play like some pretty good offensive rebounding teams, and they're holding their own. And they have a lot of different options in the front court. They have a lot of different like play styles in that front court that I think they can adapt to, what type of front court that they're playing night in and night out. I know I think Duke exposed them a little bit on the interior, but that's more of an extreme. Like that's one of the best teams in the country, and they didn't have their point guard in Mikal Brown to really match Duke's firepower. So at the end of the day, I think Louisville's going to be fine. Like I don't view them as a Final Four team at the end of the season, but they're absolutely a candidate. They just wouldn't be on my short list to be there. And I think I'll just touch on Iowa State real quick. I think from a championship perspective, I obviously still think they're in the mix, but I think they're regressing on the offensive end as we kind of expected. I don't think the shooting efficiency was something that they could maintain. I mean, Milan Momcilovic is still incredible. I believe he had 34 points the other night against Cincinnati,
Yeah.
But it's kind of the other pieces that haven't really been able to step up consistently as shooters. I know Jamarian Bateman off the bench is a good shooter, but he's just more of a catch and shoot guy. It's kind of a filler role player, but it comes from the other guys that need to, provide a little bit more from a scoring efficiency standpoint. And I believe over the last month, they are the 32nd ranked team in the country with the 62nd rated offense, which it's kind of what we assumed that they were going to end up, or at least on the offensive end, by season's end. We didn't really view them as like a team that could finish in the top 20 on the offensive end. Like the personnel just didn't seem to quite be there from a depth perspective. They obviously had like the big three of Lipsy, Momcilovic, and Josh Jefferson, but it's just the other pieces that we were a bit skeptical of. And I think that's sort of rearing its head right now. The defense is obviously going to be able to hang in with any team in the country every single night, but I just think it's more the offense is regressing a tad. I think they can go deep in March with strictly their defense, but their offense is starting to regress a little bit like we expected.
Marcus, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, the offense has regressed. And then I think one of the more shocking stats of last week for their 2 games is that they actually lost the turnover battle in both games, which is pretty abnormal. So they actually only forced 8 turnovers, I believe, against Cincinnati and then 9 against Kansas. So just, I think, an abnormal week, at least defensively. Cincinnati scoring 79 points. We've talked a lot about Cincinnati's woeful offense, and to give up 79 to them is not great, we'll say. But I think that Iowa State's going to be fine. Like they're still in the mix for me. Like offensively, they're not as great, but the defense is going to be able to kind of keep them. It'll balance things out, I think, is the best way of putting it. And like shooting wise, if Momcilovic is still going to play as well as he's played, like you're going to get better, I think, out of Lipsy. Like he has really not shot the ball very well of late, especially. He's 31.5%. I would expect some better play, some more positive regression the other way for their offense, even though it has fallen a little bit. I think that it will play better. So I'm not going to panic on Iowa State at all. Like they're still 16-2, still a really good team. So
yeah, absolutely. Just like you said, it's just a bad week. If we see this trend continue, then there's area of concern. But before transitioning into briefly talking about the next week a little bit, I have a prediction question for you guys. So far from what you've seen, and then factor in the rest of the season. So not like to this point, but at the end of the season, who do you think the 4 number 1 seeds will be in the tournament? Cody, I'll start with you.
I mean, I really want to say Nebraska because if the season were to end today, I think Nebraska actually would be a 1 seed. But
yeah,
there is regression, some sort of regression coming for them. I still think they're a very good team. I think they're more than likely a top 15 to 20 team in the country as opposed to where they're sitting right now. But if the season were to end today, I think Arizona has pretty well locked up its spot as a 1 seed with their resume so far. I think Duke ends up being a 1 seed. I think their non-con resume was pretty impressive, and this is a better ACC, and I think they obviously have one of the best home courts in the country. Their defense is going to travel on the road. So I'll say Duke is a 1 seed. I mean, it's tough. I don't want to be too chalky here, but I feel like Michigan could drop a few and get themselves to a 2. I don't know if that's crazy or not. I also want to say Houston actually ends up getting a 1 seed because of how good they are on the road in league play. Like they've lost I think they've lost 3 Big 12 road games since they've been in the Big 12 in 2 years. Like that's just an absolutely ridiculous number. So I'll say Houston ends up getting a 3rd 1 seed. The 4th one's tough. It could be UConn with their resume right now. I'm actually a fraction worried about what their offense has looked like lately. That's a team that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit. We could do that after this, but for the sake of this, I'll say Michigan. I'll say, Michigan, Duke, Arizona, Houston are my 4 1 seeds.
Yeah, right on. And touching base on the Houston comment, I mean, nothing travels quite like defense, right? So
yeah, they've been unreal. They're the proof of it. They're the main proof. Like if you want to look at a team, talk about defense travels, it's Houston. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's pretty incredible. I didn't know that stat actually. So Marcus,
that's a guess, honestly, but I believe it's around there.
You're probably right. Yeah, I feel like you're probably right, or at least in the ballpark. Marcus, who do you have as your 4 1 seeds?
So we're talking projecting this out, right?
Projecting out, yes, not as of today, but
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Arizona, I think has to be there. I'm worried about UConn as well. I'm gonna leave them out of a 1 seed at the moment. I'm gonna say Michigan does enough and stays as a 1 seed. I think Houston is a team, like Cody said. I think they're gonna just kind of roll through conference play. They'll have some tough games, of course, but I just expect they won't lose more than a couple of games in that league. And they'll be fine and end up as a 1 seed with maybe 3 losses on their record, 3 or 4. And the 4th one's where it gets tricky. I'm torn because I'm more I'm projecting it out. I guess I'll be a little bit bold here. I think Florida wins the SEC still. I think Florida still has a chance to get the final 1 seed.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I thought you were going to go Nebraska there when you said you were going to go bold, but I guess not that bold.
I know it's probably they have 5 losses on the schedule. They're ranked 16th right now. But we talked about it preseason, a very favorable SEC schedule. They probably don't, but I didn't want to go Duke and be the same as Cody here. Or even Purdue, I have concerns with them. They've limped at times recently, had slow starts. So I think it's feasible for them to drop a few. I just think Florida, with the schedule that they have in the SEC, I think they could feasibly, do very well again in conference and end up in the middle of the top 10 with a chance, if they were to win maybe the SEC tournament, have a chance to be a 1 seed. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and be bold there and say that they do. But yeah, UConn has limped their way to wins over the last couple of weeks, which Cody kind of started to touch on. The offense has not been there, and they're kind of just squeaking by right now because they're simply just better than you. And they're playing some of these teams in the Big East that aren't the teams that they're trying to beat come NCAA tournament time, right? They're trying to beat Houston. They're trying to beat Arizona. Like, those are the teams they're aiming to beat. They're not trying to beat, with all due respect, they're not trying to beat Georgetown in, mid-March, right?
Yeah,
they could be if Ed Cooley gets the boys rolling.
Yeah, you never know. But we see this, I feel like, year after year with UConn, where they kind of play down to the bottom of the Big East a lot. And yeah, I'm not sure really what to think about it. Cody, what's your 2 cents on that? Like, why do you think they always play down to their competition, it seems like, during conference games?
Well, I mean, I think they have a target on their backs. I think that's kind of the number one thing. But I mean, they also have like somewhat of a matchup flaw. And Marcus has talked about this a lot. It's like they don't really take care of the ball. They haven't done it really at all in Big East play. I believe they have the worst turnover percentage in league play. And they're actually the 5th rated offense when you filter for just Big East play. That's among Big East competition. I believe like Creighton, Providence, St. John's, and one other team is ahead of them right now, which seems kind of crazy. We thought UConn was kind of a shoe-in to be the number one offense in this league and like potentially even in the country, but they sit at 39th right now in KenPom offensive adjusted efficiency. And it's the defense that's kind of led the way for them. And I personally think they've been a bit fortunate, especially with 3-point variance. Teams are shooting like an extremely low rate against them right now, 27.5% from 3 on the entire season. That's good for 4th in the country. Typically the leader in 3-point percentage defense sits around like 29 to 30. So I do think we're going to see just some regression there. So I definitely have my concerns, not really on both ends. Like UConn, like their point of attack defense has gotten significantly better, but I do think the offense is definitely somewhat of an issue. Like solo ball is like, I don't know if it's regression from last season because he just doesn't really look right as a shot maker, and they have other shot makers to kind of make up for him, but they also haven't been as dominant in the extras as I would have expected. I would have expected them to be much better on the offensive glass at this point in the season. They're 73rd, which is a good number, but their turnover rate keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that solo ball has had some sort of regression this year, or just taking less shots, making less shots. But we're going to transition into looking at the next week here. So what games do you guys have highlighted looking into this next week and are looking forward to watch? Marcus, I'll go with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vanderbilt at Arkansas is going to be a really fun game. Going to be a high-paced, fun offensive game. I would think it's going to be another one of those games that could take 2 hours and 45 minutes or something. One of those classic SEC games. If you're sitting back at 9 o'clock to watch it, probably going to end at 11:30 or later. But I think that'll be a really fun game. Obviously, we didn't even touch on Vanderbilt, but tough week for them. Lost at Texas by 16, and then lost at home to Florida by 4. Now have to go on the road to an Arkansas team that obviously has dynamic guards and poses a lot of matchup problems for teams. So I think that one is going to be a lot of fun. I think that some of the other games, like Texas at Kentucky, me being a Texas fan, I'm going to be tuned in, but also from the Kentucky standpoint of, can they keep this thing rolling? I think that has some intrigue. That one's on Wednesday night. And then later in the week, like Houston at Texas Tech on Saturday, should be a fun game. They played 2 weeks ago, was it? At Houston. That was a 4 or 5 point game. So, it's a get back game here. Saturday really has some good games. Illinois at Purdue should be a great game. Tennessee and Bama. It just kind of goes on and on. Like we talked about at the show, like we're in conference play. Like every week just has fantastic games that you're sure to at least get a few. I think North Carolina at Virginia, we touched on that one earlier. I think that one has has intrigue for a lot of reasons. Like Virginia's been playing really well, North Carolina not so much, but it's an opportunity for them to try and right the ship a little bit and get people off the back of Hubert Davis. So I'm excited for this week, like any other week, but we're now under 2 months to March Madness, so it's time for teams to either start figuring it out or they're in deep trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Cody, any games you want to highlight, a game or two you want to just throw out there?
Yeah, a lot of the similar games for me, like Texas Tech has a big week, Baylor tomorrow, and Houston on Saturday, and a game that they probably should have won at the Fertitta Center. I think they kind of just ran out of gas with the lack of depth that they have. But playing in Lubbock, I think they have a much better chance, especially to hit shots at a higher clip, keep that game extremely slow paced. Like obviously Houston likes it that way too, but I think Tech obviously has a better chance to win that game at home on Saturday. I'm excited for NC State Clemson tomorrow. I think we're going to learn a lot about both of those teams. Clemson, I think we're going to find out how real they are. NC State coming off that loss to Georgia Tech, I think probably deserve a little bit more flack than they've gotten. But ultimately, I think they're going to be okay. I think it's like a pretty decent matchup for NC State. So we're going to find out a lot about both of those teams on Tuesday. I'm also really excited for Illinois Purdue. Illinois has kind of gone under the radar as potentially one of the best teams in the country. Their offense absolutely cooks, and I don't think Keaton Wagler gets enough credit for what he's done, coming from a 3-star to potentially being the best player on Illinois' roster. So I'm extremely impressed with what I've seen from them, and tough matchup against Purdue with that pick and roll duo, but I guess we'll see how that plays out. And then obviously UNC Virginia will be a fun one. Villanova UConn, I think, is going to be fun. Nobody kind of needs to figure out their defense. They've definitely taken a step back in league play, as we did have concerns with their roster as a whole. But Kevin Willard he's been coaching them up, like mixing up looks, full court press, like really slowing the game down. And UConn, like we talked about with their offense, they kind of need to figure something out. Villanova's not going to like really get after you on the defensive end, so they could feel comfortable in that game. So that's potentially a get right spot for them. So yeah, definitely excited for the week in general.
Yeah, a lot of good ball to see, basically. But anything else to add, fellas?
No. I mean, it just kind of hit me saying we're less than 2 months away to March Madness. How crazy that really sounds. We're kind of in the gauntlet now of conference play, where teams are in the thick of it, a couple games a week. Always a big game, especially for the teams that we'll start talking bubble talk here in probably another 3 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks. The bubble will start to form, which seems crazy to think about, but we're creeping up on that time of year. So
yeah, the season's too short, it always seems like. Cody, anything to add?
No, it definitely is too short. I wouldn't mind if they played an NBA schedule. They could play year round for all I care. That'd be great for me.
That would just be incredible. All right, let's wrap it up here. As always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.